Hey guys, tonight we're stepping straight into a world you probably wouldn't last a single day in: medieval times. You might think you're tough because you once survived a camping trip without Wi-Fi, but trust me, this is different. Picture this. You open your eyes to the kind of morning chill that seeps through your bones before you've even fully woken up. No cozy duvet, no central heating, just a thin, scratchy blanket and the smell of damp straw underneath you. And the straw? Oh, it's alive. Tiny fleas, bed bugs, and the occasional curious rat have claimed your bed as their own. Congratulations, you're already sharing your morning with about 30 other roommates you didn't invite. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lie there for a moment, your breath making small white clouds in the cold air. The wooden beams above you creak gently, as though they might drop a splinter or two just to keep things interesting. The smell of smoke from last night's fire lingers faintly, mixed with the unmistakable tang of damp earth. If you slept in your clothes, which you did, they're stiff from yesterday's sweat and mud. You try to wiggle your toes, but they're half numb, and your breath feels like it's freezing in your throat. Rolling over, you pull the blanket tighter, but it's more holes than fabric. The pillow, if we're generous enough to call it that, is a small sack stuffed with straw and maybe a mouse nest, judging by the faint scratching sound you swear you hear. The roof above you is a patchwork of wood and thatch. In the night, it probably let in a drizzle or two, leaving cold, wet spots near your feet. This is your home: one room, dirt floor, no windows, and a single hearth for heat. If you're lucky, your family didn't have to share it with livestock this winter. But some neighbors still do. The sun hasn't even peeked over the horizon yet, but you know the day's work will start soon. In winter, you might wake to pitch blackness, relying on the dim glow of embers in the hearth. You stretch, which really means shivering in a slightly different position, and you notice the smell of smoke is stronger now. Someone's stoking the fire. It's both comforting and suffocating, since the only ventilation is the gap where the roof doesn't quite meet the wall. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants were naturally early risers or just victims of necessity. But in this world, you don't have much of a choice. If you want to survive the day, you start moving as soon as there's light enough to see. Staying in bed isn't cozy. It's cold, damp, and a perfect place for fleas to hold their breakfast buffet. And speaking of breakfast, well, that comes later. For now, you just need to get up. You push yourself upright and immediately feel the stiffness in your back. The bed may be soft compared to a rock, but it's been shaping your spine like a medieval torture device. You glance at the single wooden chest in the corner. Everything you own fits in there. There's no private closet, no drawers, no shelves of folded outfits. Just your one good tunic, the one you wear to church, and your work clothes, which you're already wearing because undressing in this cold is madness. The floor is uneven and hard-packed dirt, cold against your bare feet, and scattered with yesterday's straw. You keep your steps light, avoiding the darkest patches where dampness has seeped in. The air smells of earth, smoke, and a faint whiff of whatever your neighbor had for dinner last night. The houses here are close. Sounds and smells bleed from one to the next like gossip in a crowded market. Outside, the world is still quiet, but you can hear the faint cluck of a chicken somewhere and the low, sleepy grunt of a cow. No birdsong yet. Even they are holding back until the light strengthens. You can see your breath in the dim room, and every inhalation feels like drawing in a ribbon of cold mist. You rub your arms briskly, more for the feeling of doing something, than any actual warmth, and glance toward the hearth. The last embers glow faintly. Time to get that fire going again before the frost decides to settle inside the house. You take the small bundle of kindling from beside the hearth, twigs you gathered yesterday, and blow gently over the coals. The smoke curls up, stinging your eyes, and you cough softly, waving it away with one hand. Soon, a thin flame licks upward, promising at least a little heat to chase the edge off the morning chill. As you crouch there, you hear movement outside, the sound of boots on frosted ground. Someone's up and heading toward the well. You remember that today's water run might be tricky. The bucket ropes freeze, and the water's surface can crust over with ice. But that's just one of the many lovely little challenges medieval life throws at you before breakfast. By the time you straighten up, the room's a touch warmer, but only in that, well, at least my fingers aren't numb anymore sort of way. You glance toward the tiny wooden door, which has a gap at the bottom big enough for a curious cat to squeeze through. In fact, you suspect that's exactly what happened last night. A neighbor's tabby might have joined you in your sleep, lured by the warmth, or maybe it was just a rat. Best not to think too hard about it. And here's the thing, this is just the first 10 minutes of your medieval day. You haven't even faced the real challenges yet. The moment you step outside, the world gets even less forgiving. But for now, you take a deep breath, stretch your back again, and accept that this hovel, this cold, drafty, bug-sharing hut is the only home you've got, and it's time to get moving. You shuffle toward the water basin in the corner. It's just a shallow wooden bowl sitting on a stool. And brace yourself for the morning routine. The water inside is cold enough to make your fingers ache just dipping them in. No steaming hot shower here, no lavender-scented soap, just icy liquid pulled from the well yesterday and left to chill overnight. You scoop a handful and splash it over your face, immediately regretting it as the shock makes you gasp. Somewhere, in the back of your mind, you hear your 21st century self whisper, "You could just skip this." But the medieval you knows that skipping even a basic wash means letting yesterday's sweat, dirt, and ash set in for good. There's no toothbrush waiting for you either. Instead, you reach for a small twig, a chew stick from a hazel branch, one end frayed into a makeshift brush. You scrape your teeth with it, feeling the rough fibers scratch at your gums. It's better than nothing, but just barely. Historians still argue whether medieval dental hygiene was actually as bad as popular myth suggests, but given your current tools, you're not betting on a dazzling smile. You rub your hands on a coarse linen cloth that's never truly clean. Laundry is a rare event, mostly because washing clothes in the river during winter is a near-death experience. Your hands already sting from the water. Trying to scrub an entire tunic would leave them raw for days. So you live with the faint smell of smoke, sweat, and whatever your tunic absorbed last week when you slipped in the mud. The basin water ripples slightly as you lean over it, and for a moment you catch your reflection. The dim light and uneven surface distort your face, making you look older, more weathered. Maybe it's the dirt smudge on your cheek or the shadow from the hood you pulled over your head last night, but you don't look like someone who's had an easy life. That's because you haven't. Next comes your hair. No shampoo, no conditioner. If you're lucky, you've got a small comb carved from bone or wood. You drag it through your hair, wincing as it catches on knots. A louse drops into the basin, floating there like it's mocking you. You flick it away and keep going. Lice are just a fact of life here. Everyone has them. You can't get rid of them, only manage them, and you've stopped feeling embarrassed about it. Some people in this era swear by a rinse made from vinegar or herbs to keep pests at bay. You tried it once. It stung your scalp and made you smell like a walking salad. You decided then that the lice could stay. Once you've finished the bare minimum, you move on to what passes for deodorant. a small pouch of dried rosemary and sage you rub over your tunic. It masks the worst odors for a little while, though it also leaves tiny leaves stuck in the wool. You smell faintly like a roasting chicken, which is probably an improvement. A pot of water sits by the hearth, warming over the newly stoked fire. It's not for washing. That would be wasteful. Instead, it's for the thin morning brew. Not coffee, not even tea unless you count steeping a handful of dried mint leaves in hot water as tea. Mostly you drink small beer in the mornings, a weak ale with low alcohol, just enough to make the water safe. It's warm from the fire and vaguely bready in taste. It doesn't wake you up, it just fills your stomach a little. You take a sip and wince at the sourness. There's a sediment at the bottom that you've learned not to think about too much. The cup is wooden, rough around the edges, and has a small crack that leaks if you hold it too long. So you drink quickly. Meanwhile, the rest of the house is stirring. A cough from the far side, the creak of someone's knees as they stand. You're not alone in this space. In a medieval household, privacy isn't really a thing. You all sleep, eat, and work in the same room. If you're a servant in a larger household, you might share a bed with another servant just to stay warm. If you're part of a peasant family, you've got your parents, siblings, and possibly a grandparent or two all within arm's reach. You learn to pretend you don't hear each other's morning noises. You glance toward the hearth again, where a small loaf of coarse bread sits wrapped in cloth. That's breakfast, if you can call it that. It's hard enough to chip a tooth if you're not careful. You'll eat it later, but for now you're still in the getting yourself presentable stage. Presentable here doesn't mean stylish. It just means you're wearing enough layers to not freeze and not so filthy that people move away from you in church. Your final act of self-care is grabbing a small strip of cloth to wrap around your head. It's not for fashion. It's to keep the wind out of your ears and maybe hide the worst of your hair. The cloth smells faintly of smoke and sheep, but so does everything else you own. You knot it in place. Grab your outer tunic from the peg by the door and pull it over your head. The wool scratches at your skin, but you've long since stopped expecting comfort from clothes. Somewhere outside, a rooster crows. You step toward the door, ready to face the muddy, cold streets, and realize with a small sigh, this was just hygiene. The day hasn't even begun to challenge you yet. You step outside, and the first breath you take is sharp, like the air has teeth. The cold pinches your nose and ears instantly, and you can feel the tips of your fingers complaining already, even through the thin wool gloves you've pulled on. The ground beneath your feet is hard and uneven, with frost clinging to patches of grass between muddy tracks. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks, setting off another two in chorus. Breakfast isn't waiting for you. You have to fetch it, or more accurately, scrounge together whatever's available. This morning it's a chunk of yesterday's coarse rye bread, left over from the communal loaf your household baked earlier in the week. You break off a piece with your teeth, which is harder than it sounds. The bread's dense, chewy, and full of grains that crunch under your molars, and not always because they're seeds. Sometimes it's just grit from the millstones, a kind of medieval seasoning you can't avoid. You wash it down with a gulp of small beer, carried in a leather flask that's been patched more times than you can count. The liquid is sour and flat, but it's safer than the well water, which you know from experience can give you days of cramps if you drink it straight. Historians still argue whether medieval ale was actually enjoyed for its taste or simply endured as a necessary evil. You're leaning toward the latter. If you're lucky, and today you are sort of, there's a smear of soft cheese to go with your bread. It's not the creamy stuff you'd recognize. This is sharp, tangy, and comes with the occasional blue-green streak. You tell yourself it's meant to look like that. You take a bite and the flavor punches you awake more than any coffee ever could. As you chew, you look around. The village is stirring slowly. Smoke curls lazily from thatched rooftops, and the faint clatter of a bucket at the well echoes through the cold air. Somewhere down the lane, a woman calls out to her children, her voice carrying over the low hum of morning activity. A cart rumbles past, its wooden wheels groaning under the weight of firewood, and the driver gives you a nod as he goes. You pull your cloak tighter around you. It's a rough wool garment, heavy and scratchy, with a clasp that's been bent so many times it barely holds. The wind finds its way in anyway, sliding down your neck like an icy finger. You shift your bread from one hand to the other, trying to keep your fingers from going completely numb. Eating is not a leisurely affair. You stand, you chew, you keep moving to stay warm. Sometimes, on good days, you might eat near the hearth, letting the smoke curl around you like a blanket. But on mornings when there's work to be done, and there always is, you take your food with you. The road out of the village is little more than a strip of churned mud, frozen in some places and slick in others. You pick your way carefully, avoiding the deeper ruts where water has gathered and iced over. Every step is a gamble. Will the ground hold, or will your foot sink in with a sucking sound and leave you wobbling? You pass a few neighbors along the way. Some greet you with a quick nod, others keep their heads down, their breath puffing in little clouds as they hurry on. In a place where everyone knows each other, greetings are brief. There's no time for long chatter before breakfast, unless, of course, you're trading a bit of news or gossip. One man tells you about a traveling merchant who arrived late last night. He's selling dried fish, bolts of cloth, and, most importantly, salt. Salt is worth more than gold in your daily life, because without it you can't preserve meat. You make a mental note to see if you can spare a few coins later, though you already suspect the answer is no. By the time you finish your bread, your jaws sore from the effort. You lick the last crumbs from your fingers, dust them on your cloak, and think about how many more hours it will be until you eat again. Lunch isn't guaranteed. Sometimes, you just push through until the evening meal. That means this morning's bread has to last. In your stomach, if not in your mind. A group of children run past you, their bare feet slapping against the frozen ground. They're laughing, chasing one another, unfazed by the cold. You envy their energy, though not their thin tunics. They've probably already had their breakfast, a smaller, rougher piece of bread than yours, and now they're off to help their parents with the day's work. Somewhere behind you, the church bell begins to toll. It's slow, deep, and measured, marking the start of the day for those who haven't yet left their homes. The sound carries far in the still air, and for a moment, you pause to listen. There's something comforting in its rhythm, even if it also means you need to pick up your pace. The cold seems sharper now, the sun still hiding behind a veil of gray clouds. You pull your cloak tighter and adjust the strap of your leather satchel. Inside are a few tools you'll need for the day, worn, patched, and priceless because without them, you can't earn your keep. The bread was just the first step. Now, the real work begins. You head back inside briefly to layer up before the day's labor. The tunic you've been wearing since yesterday is rough wool, but it's thin in spots where the threads have worn down from years of use. Over that, you pull a second tunic, heavier and stiffer, dyed a dull brown that hides the worst of the stains. The wool scratches at your neck and wrists, and you instinctively shift your shoulders to ease the itch. But comfort isn't the goal. Survival is. Next comes a belt, wide and leather, stiff from age and weather. It holds the tunic snug around your waist and gives you a place to hang your pouch and small knife. The knife isn't a weapon, not really. It's a tool for cutting food, rope, or twine. You slip it into its sheath with a familiar motion. You wrap your legs in woolen hose, not the stretchy, fitted kind you'd imagine today, but long tubes of fabric tied at the top with narrow cords. They sag and wrinkle around your knees, and the fabric feels damp in spots where it never fully dried from yesterday. Over these, you strap leather boots that are more like stiff leather socks. They're thick enough to keep out some of the cold, but thin enough that you can feel every stone in the road. Finally, you pull on a cloak, heavy and hooded, with a faint lanolin smell from the sheep it came from. The clasp is a simple bronze pin, and you secure it at your shoulder, letting the fabric drape over you like a portable wall against the wind. The hood shadows your face, helping to keep the cold from biting at your ears. You glance toward the small chest in the corner. The only other clothing you own is folded inside. One good outfit, rarely worn, kept for church or special occasions, and a thin shirt you sometimes wear to sleep in summer. That's it. No wardrobe to browse through. No choosing between styles. In this world, clothing is less about expression and more about endurance. Historians still argue whether peasants had more than 2 sets of clothing. But standing here in your tiny hovel, you can see why extra garments were a luxury. Wool is expensive, linen takes time to produce, and every piece of fabric represents hours of labor, either yours or someone else's. The idea of fast fashion doesn't exist. Nothing is fast about making clothes. You run a hand over the cloak's fabric. It's heavy, but the weave is loose enough for wind to find the gaps. In heavy rain, it will soak through completely, becoming a cold, clingy weight. But today it's dry, and you're grateful for it. You tie the last knot on your hose cords, flexing your legs to test the fit, and grab your satchel. Inside, your tools rattle softly: an iron hook, a small hammer, a bit of cord, and a wooden-handled awl. They're simple, but each one is vital to your work. Losing one would mean bartering or begging to replace it, and tools aren't cheap. You've seen people take better care of a hammer than their own teeth. As you step toward the door again, you glance at the rough wool mittens on the peg. You pull them on, flexing your fingers inside. They're awkward for fine tasks, but without them, you'd lose feeling in your hands before noon. You push the door open, letting the cold morning light spill inside. The village path stretches out ahead, slick with frost in the shaded spots. Your boots crunch over the frozen mud as you start walking, your layers making you feel both bulky and strangely vulnerable. You're warm enough for now, but you know that won't last. A cart creaks past, its driver wrapped in an even thicker cloak, the wheels cutting deep grooves into the muddy track. A couple of chickens scatter as you pass, clucking indignantly. One pauses to peck at a patch of frozen grain, its breath puffing out in tiny clouds. Somewhere nearby, a woman shakes out a large wool blanket, sending a wave of dust and stray fibers into the air. You catch the faint scent of lanolin again, and realize that no matter where you go, the smell of sheep is inescapable. It's woven into the very fabric of life here. Your boots sink slightly in a thawing patch of ground, and you mutter under your breath. The mud clings heavy and sucking, and you have to twist your foot to pull free. It's not even mid-morning yet, and your legs already feel the extra weight. But you keep moving. The hood slips forward, shadowing your vision, so you push it back slightly. The wind immediately finds the gap at your neck and slides down your back like a cold finger. You shiver and pull the hood up again, tightening it this time. The battle between warmth and visibility is one you fight daily. By the time you reach the edge of the village, the layers you put on are starting to feel too warm from the effort of walking. But you know better than to remove anything. The moment you stop moving, the cold will seep back in, and you'll wish for every scrap of wool you own. So you keep walking, one foot in front of the other, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of a life that's all about enduring the elements, not conquering them. The path out of the village narrows into a ribbon of trampled mud, flanked by bare hedgerows and the skeletal remains of last season's weeds. A light mist hangs low over the fields, muting the shapes of everything beyond a few dozen paces. You keep your head down against the breeze, watching your boots press into the softened earth. leaving deep impressions that will fill with water the next time it rains. Your destination this morning is the open farmland just beyond the village's grazing commons. The plots here are long, narrow strips, each belonging to a different family, marked not by fences but by the faint rise of turf or a crooked line of stones. There's no privacy. You work alongside your neighbors, each of you painfully aware of what the others are managing to grow. Today's job is repair. Winter storms have pulled loose some of the wattle fencing meant to keep wandering animals out of the cultivated soil. The fence is little more than a lattice of thin, flexible branches woven between upright stakes. Simple, but effective, if it's intact. Unfortunately, the section you're heading to now has been battered by wind and the occasional hoof of a curious cow. You stop near a small pile of cut willow branches left there for this purpose. Their bark is slick from recent frost, and you feel the chill transfer through your gloves as you pick them up. You carry an armful to the damaged section, set them down, and crouch to inspect the gap. Sure enough, there are hoof prints on either side. A bold trespasser had themselves a little midnight feast. You take out your small knife to trim the ends of the branches. The blade bites into the wood with a satisfying thunk, each cut sending the faint scent of green sap into the air. You wedge the trimmed rods between the upright stakes, weaving them over and under until the gap is closed again. It's repetitive work, but that's part of the rhythm of the day here. Small, necessary tasks done by hand, one after another, until you've run out of daylight. A neighbor passes by as you work, balancing a basket of turnips on one hip. She pauses to say that she saw a fox near the hen house last night. You both glance toward the distant row of cottages where smoke is curling from chimneys. Foxes aren't rare, but losing a chicken in winter is a serious blow. Every egg, every scrap of meat matters. You promise to keep an eye out, and she moves on, her boots squelching in the mud. As you return to weaving, you think about how this task hasn't changed for centuries. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants spent more time repairing than farming, but standing here, with mud on your knees and frost on your sleeves, it's hard to see much difference. Keeping the land ready to produce is as much work as planting the seeds themselves. By the time you've reinforced the last section of the fence, your fingers are stiff from the cold, and your back protests from bending over so long. You straighten slowly, hearing the creak of leather and the whisper of wool as your layers shift. The repaired fence looks unremarkable, exactly how it should look. In this world, unremarkable often means safe from trouble. You gather your tools and start along the edge of the fields. The mist has begun to thin, revealing crows hopping over the furrows in search of grubs. Their black shapes stand out starkly against the pale ground, and their calls echo in the quiet. You pull your hood lower, partly to block the wind, partly to tune out the noise. A cluster of children appear further up the path, herding a few scruffy sheep toward the grazing commons. The animals move reluctantly, stopping often to sniff at the ground. The children prod them along with thin sticks, their voices sharp in the cold air. One of the smaller boys runs ahead to chase a particularly stubborn ewe, slipping in the mud and laughing even as his hands turn red from the chill. You reach a patch of frozen ruts where a cart has passed earlier, and your boot catches on the edge of one. You stumble, catching yourself with a quick step, and mutter under your breath. The path demands constant attention. A twisted ankle out here could mean weeks of lost work, and there's no such thing as sick pay. The sun finally pushes through a break in the clouds, casting a pale, watery light over the fields. It's not warm, not really, but it makes the world feel less oppressive. You pause for a moment, letting it fall across your face, before turning back toward the village. There are more repairs to make before midday, and your stomach is already wondering if there will be something to eat when you return. You make your way back toward the village, boots heavy with a mix of mud and frost, and slip into the low-beamed workshop where your day's real labor waits. The air inside is warmer than outside, but not by much. The hearth at the far end smolders more than it blazes, and the smoke hangs lazily in the rafters. You set your satchel down on a bench, feeling the stiffness in your shoulders from the morning's fence repairs. Today, you're assisting with a job that's as unglamorous as it is necessary: mending tools. A broken spade or a loose hammerhead might not seem catastrophic, but in a place where every task depends on a working implement, the downtime can throw an entire household into chaos. You take up a worn wooden handle and examine it. The surface is smooth where countless hands have gripped it, but there's a worrying crack running partway down from the top. You pull your small knife and shave away splinters, careful not to deepen the split. Then, using an iron hoop heated in the embers, you reinforce the join. The hot metal sizzles faintly against the wood, sending up a thin wisp of steam. It's slow, methodical work, but there's satisfaction in knowing you're extending the life of a tool that will dig, chop, or haul for another season. Around you, other workers are busy in their own crafts. A cooper, fitting staves into the belly of a new barrel. A weaver at the back, spinning wool into coarse thread, her foot pumping the treadle in a steady rhythm. You nod to her as you pass, catching the faint smell of lanolin again. That smell is everywhere, the medieval equivalent of background music. The soundscape here is a blend of scraping metal, soft thuds of wood on wood, and the occasional muffled curse when something slips. Nobody's wearing ear protection, of course. The constant noise just becomes part of your life. Midway through the morning, you switch tasks to shaping small iron hooks. It's not glamorous, they're for hanging pots over a fire. But without them, cooking would be a miserable juggling act. You heat each iron rod in the coals until it glows a dull orange, then hammer it into a hook shape on the anvil. Each strike sends a ringing vibration through your arm, and you can feel your forearm muscles protesting. Historians still argue whether medieval craft workers were more specialized or if most people knew a little of everything. Standing here, it's easy to see the appeal of the latter. If you can fix your own tools, patch your own clothes, and mend a fence, you're less likely to starve when something breaks. The hours stretch on, broken only by short pauses to warm your hands near the hearth. The fire smokes badly because the wood is damp, and each time you lean close, you blink against the sting in your eyes. Your mittens are off for the fine work and your fingertips are stiff, the nails edged with grime from wood, iron, and earth. At one point, the village reeve drops in to check on orders. He needs extra buckets made before the next market day. He stands in the doorway, letting a slice of cold air creep in, and gives you the kind of look that says, "I'll be expecting them sooner than you'd like." You nod silently, knowing full well that deadlines are as immovable here as the seasons. You finish your last hook, just as the dull ache in your back becomes sharp. Straightening, you stretch, hearing your joints crack in protest. You set the hooks aside in a neat pile, ready for delivery, and run your sleeve across your forehead. It's not sweat. It's condensation from the cold, clammy air. As you step outside, the world feels brighter, the sun having burned away most of the morning mist. But the reprieve is short-lived. The road between the workshop and your next task is a quagmire from melted frost. The mud sucks greedily at your boots, and each step feels like lifting a sack of grain. By the time you near the field edge again, your breath is visible in short bursts. You think briefly about how, in the modern world, a day's work might mean sitting in a warm office. Here, it's hammering iron, patching fences, mending wood, each one a physical act, each one slowly wearing down your body. There's no weekend coming to give you a break. Your stomach grumbles loudly, reminding you that the small breakfast you had was more ceremonial than filling. Soon it will be midday, and with luck there'll be something Anything I'm to eat that doesn't involve chewing through crust like leather. By the time the village bell clangs for midday pause, you've trudged your way to the low, smoky hall where the healer keeps her supplies. Not that you're here for pleasure. Nobody is. You'd been hoping for bread and ale first, but the sharp ache in your left palm has been growing worse since you caught it on a splinter this morning. You figure it's better to deal with it now before it turns into something ugly. The hall smells like every herbal shop you've ever imagined. Sharp rosemary, earthy sage, and an underlying tang of something medicinal and slightly rotten. Shelves line the walls, holding bundles of dried plants, jars of cloudy liquid, and a few unidentifiable lumps in waxed cloth. The healer, an older woman with eyes like river stones, motions you to sit without a word. You place your hand on the rough wooden table, and she peers at the splinter wound. "Not deep," she says finally, "but it needs drawing out." She reaches for a small clay pot, uncorks it, and reveals a thick greenish paste that smells faintly of onions and something swampy. She smears it across your palm and wraps it in a strip of cloth that might have once been white. This is the good treatment. You've heard of others less lucky, whose cuts were cleansed with vinegar or worse, cauterized with a hot blade. Medieval medicine is a gamble. Sometimes you get an effective herbal salve. Sometimes you get advice to carry a charm and pray. As she works, you notice a small jar of dried leeches on the shelf. They're not for decoration. Bloodletting is still a common cure here, whether you have a fever, a rash, or just look unbalanced. Historians still argue whether medieval physicians genuinely believed in the science of humors, or simply leaned on tradition because it was what people trusted. Either way, a jar of leeches is not something you want to see near your lunch hour. The healer also has a bundle of willow bark strips hanging to dry, a reminder that even before aspirin, people knew of natural pain relief. She tells you, almost casually, that if your hand swells, she can bleed the heat out of it. You nod politely, tucking your bandaged hand close as you thank her and back toward the door. Outside, you breathe deeply, glad to exchange the herbal funk air for the cold, damp wind. On your way toward the square, you pass a small crowd gathered near the well. Someone's child has taken a fall, and a neighbor is arguing loudly about whether to fetch the healer or let the bone set itself. You keep moving. Too many opinions and none of them likely to end well. A more comforting smell catches you near the baker's corner. Fresh bread. Fresh is relative, of course. The loaf you buy is yesterday's, still hard enough that you could probably use it as a weapon. You crack it open with effort, revealing a dense crumb speckled with bits of unground husk. A thin slice of salted pork from your pouch completes the meal. It's not exactly luxurious, but it's fuel. And it's grit in your teeth from the mill's rough grindstone. You eat standing against a wall, watching the square bustle with trades and gossip. Someone hawks a pot of dubious stew from a covered cart, the steam curling into the cold air. A man sells wax candles, their smell faintly sweet, while another sharpens knives on a whetstone. The rhythm of the village is part survival, part theater. Mid-bite, you hear a sharp cry from across the square, the kind that silences nearby chatter. A young man is clutching his arm, blood running freely from a nasty gash. You half expect someone to run for the healer, but instead, two others drag him toward the blacksmith. Within minutes, the smith is heating a small iron rod in his forge. The smell that follows, the hiss and sear of cauterized flesh, turns your stomach, and you turn away before your bread comes back up. You finish your meal in a hurry, reminding yourself that this is a world without antibiotics, where a bad cut can mean death, and where the cure can hurt more than the injury itself. Back at the workshop, the day's tasks await. Your hand aches under its herbal dressing, but it's functional enough to lift, carry, and hammer. There's no sick leave here. Work stops only when you do. As the light begins to dim toward afternoon, you think again of that jar of leeches and wonder how many of the people in this square will make it through winter without meeting them. The thought is not exactly comforting, but then again, nothing in medieval medicine really is. Your afternoon begins with a walk to a nearby household where you've been promised a meal. Meal here, meaning whatever's left in the pot from earlier. The hearth is low, and the pot itself hangs on one of those iron hooks you hammered this morning. The stew inside is a cloudy brown, dotted with limp cabbage leaves, a few beans, and something that might once have been a bit of salted fish. You ladle some into a wooden bowl, noting that the liquid is more abundant than the solids. Still, it's warm, and the smell, though not exactly appetizing, is comforting against the chill in the air. You take a sip. It's salty, with a faint bitterness that tells you the cabbage has been boiling far too long. You chew on a piece of bread alongside it, the crust threatening to test the integrity of your teeth. Midway through, you bite down on something that crunches unexpectedly. It's not a bone, more like a grain of sand. You realize it's probably grit from the millstone. It's so common here that people hardly notice. Over time, it's said to literally wear teeth down flat. You glance at your host, who's happily gnawing at a hunk of meat with a texture not unlike shoe leather. You force yourself to keep chewing, telling yourself it's better than an empty stomach. Historians still argue whether the average medieval peasant's diet was as bleak as modern depictions suggest, or whether seasonal fruits, foraged greens, and occasional meat made it more varied. But in winter, variety is a luxury. You eat what's stored, dried, salted, or pickled. Freshness is months away. Your host offers you a cup of ale, thin and sour, but safer than well water. The low alcohol kills off some of the nastier things that might be lurking, and besides, everyone drinks it, even children. You sip it slowly, feeling the warmth spread through your chest. The meal turns into a kind of slow ritual, breaking bread, dipping it into the broth, fishing out a bean or two, occasionally chatting about the weather, which, as always, is either bad or worse. There's a passing mention of a neighboring village having a pig stolen. The news is treated almost like gossip, but you can sense the tension under it. Food animals are wealth here. Losing one can mean hunger, or worse. As the bowls are cleared, your host produces a small cloth bundle. Inside is a wedge of hard cheese, pale and crumbly. You're offered a slice, and you accept gratefully. The tang is sharp, almost biting. You've heard cheese described as keeping well, but in truth, it's a balancing act between edible and inedible. This one is just on the right side of that line. A small boy shuffles in from outside, his face pink from the wind. He drops a bundle of kindling near the hearth and eyes the cheese with quiet longing. You pass him your last bite, and he takes it without hesitation, disappearing as quickly as he arrived. You can't help but think about how many mouths there are to feed in each household, and how often meals are probably skipped without complaint. When you step back into the street, the low winter sun is already sliding toward the horizon, casting long shadows. Your stomach is full enough to keep you moving, though it's more the warmth of the stew than its nutritional value that will carry you. On your way back toward the square, you pass a butcher's stall. The meat is displayed openly. Slabs of mutton, strings of sausages, and a hare hung by its feet. Flies aren't much of an issue in the cold, but you can see where knives have sliced away bits to remove spoiled edges. It's a reminder that refrigeration isn't a thing here. Everything is a race between eating it and watching it go bad. The street smells of wood smoke, damp wool, and the tang of rendered fat. Somewhere nearby, a woman is baking flatbread on a hot stone, and you catch the scent of it in the wind, just enough to make you think about eating again, even though you've just had a meal. Hunger works differently here. It's less about cravings and more about the constant low-level awareness that you'll need more fuel before long. By the time you reach your next stop, the light is fading fast, and the air has taken on that sharp bite that warns of frost. Your stomach is still turning over the grit from lunch, but there's no time to dwell on it. The day isn't done yet. As the last amber streaks of daylight bleed out over the rooftops, you make your way toward the church. Not because you're feeling especially devout, though here, religion is less a personal choice and more the spine holding the village together. Attendance is expected and absence noticed. The heavy oak door creaks as you push it open, and you're greeted by a wave of cool, slightly musty air, the scent of old wood and candle wax. Shadows stretch long between the wooden pews, lit only by flickering tallow candles and the orange glow from the altar lamps. A few villagers are already inside, murmuring prayers or simply standing in silence, eyes half closed. You slip onto a bench, its surface worn smooth by generations of elbows and knees. From the front, the priest clears his throat, adjusting his heavy robes. He launches into a sermon about fasting, sin, and the importance of humility. Not exactly groundbreaking material. Still, you notice the way everyone listens, heads bowed, some nodding slowly. Fasting days are frequent here, especially in Lent, when meat, dairy, and eggs are forbidden. Historians still argue whether these restrictions were more about religious devotion or practical food rationing. Either way, the church calendar decides what's on your plate as much as the weather or the harvest. And while wealthier households can skirt the rules with expensive imported fish, peasants like you make do with pottage, bread, and whatever salted herring you can get your hands on. As the sermon drones on, your mind drifts to the small relic displayed at the side of the altar, said to be a splinter from the true cross. Whether it's genuine or not is another matter entirely, but it's treated with deep reverence. You remember hearing an older villager claim it once healed a man's fever when touched to his forehead. Quirky as it sounds, faith here isn't just about the soul. It's woven into every explanation for sickness, misfortune, or even the weather. The priest moves into a reading from Latin scripture, the meaning lost to most of the congregation, but the rhythm of the words familiar enough to be soothing. Children fidget, a dog curls up in the aisle, and somewhere near the back, someone stifles a cough. When the service ends, you file out into the darkening street with the rest, the bells tolling behind you. Outside, a cluster of women are discussing the next feast day, debating whether the baker's last batch of communion bread was too coarse. Another man leans close to a friend, whispering about a neighbor who's been seen with the wrong sort of company. Religion here is not confined to the church walls. It bleeds into law, social rules, and even rumor. You've learned that a careless word, if overheard, can lead to accusations, and accusations in this world are heavy things. The street is darker now, lit only by the occasional torch. You pull your cloak tighter and pass by the shrine at the crossroads, where a small carved saint stands surrounded by offerings, a loaf of bread, a sprig of rosemary, a crude wax candle dripping into the dirt. Whether these are for protection or penance, you can't say, but they seem to comfort those who leave them. Somewhere beyond the square, the low chant of evening prayers drifts from another house. The rhythm of devotion is everywhere, marking time, guiding behavior, and shaping the way people see the world. You've been here only a day, yet you're already learning. It's not about what you believe, but how well you can play along. You take a final glance at the church, its silhouette framed against the night sky, and keep walking. The air feels heavier now, not just with cold, but with the weight of rules that never sleep. You're barely a few steps away from the church when the low hum of voices reaches you. Not the steady murmur of prayer, but the quick, hushed chatter of people leaning close to share something important. You drift toward a small knot of villagers standing in the shadow of a half-collapsed wall. They're speaking in the way people do when they're both excited and slightly afraid. It takes a moment to piece it together, but the fragments you catch are intriguing. Someone claims to have seen the miller sneaking into the Reeves storehouse at night. Another swears that old Marjorie's been muttering strange words over her herbs. And wasn't it just last week that a hen laid an egg with a blood-red yolk? This is how news moves here. No parchment broadsheets, no town crier in this little village. Word spreads mouth to mouth, twisting and morphing with every retelling. Historians still argue whether this constant web of gossip acted as a form of community policing or as a dangerous spark for conflict. In truth, it's probably both. You remember a quirky tidbit you overheard earlier in the day. A peddler passing through swore that in a nearby town, they buried a rooster alive under the crossroads to ward off the plague. Whether that's true or just the latest exaggerated tale, you can't say. But judging by the faces around you, such things aren't dismissed outright. The crowd shifts, and a young woman pulls you aside to share her piece. A merchant from the next shire over has been asking suspiciously many questions about the location of sheep pastures. You nod as though this is vital intelligence, and she seems satisfied. Here, even the smallest detail is treated like a potential thread in a much larger web. Of course, gossip has teeth. The same whispers that protect the community can also destroy someone standing overnight. A rumor about theft might mean the accused finds fewer customers, fewer allies in disputes, even cold shoulders at the tavern. An accusation of heresy or witchcraft, that's worse. It can mean the stocks, exile, or worse still. You've already spotted the way people listen when they pass each other in the narrow lanes. Heads inclined, eyes scanning to see who might overhear. Privacy isn't really a concept here. Your life is as public as the square you walk through. As you make your way toward the market stalls, you catch another snippet about a brewing land dispute between two families, each claiming their grandfather planted the same row of apple trees. The argument has gone on so long that no one remembers who's actually right. Still, the matter is dangerous. Tempers over land can turn to violence quickly, especially in lean years. Near the blacksmiths, a group of men are exchanging even darker news. A thief was caught in a nearby town and put in the pillory for 2 days. By the end, they say, the crowd's justice had left him barely recognizable. You glance toward the square, where the wooden stocks sit empty but waiting, and you understand why no one here takes chances. By now, the voices around you are blending together, a tide of speculation, accusation, and shared warnings. Some stories you recognize from earlier in the day, already reshaped with new facts that weren't there before. You start to see how survival here depends not just on food and warmth, but on navigating this intricate social current without stumbling into it as prey. A boy runs past, breathless, shouting that a traveling bard is setting up near the tavern. Instantly, the little gossip circle breaks apart, its fragments carried off toward the promise of music and a story told by someone with a better voice than the village priest. You watch them go, feeling the cold night settle deeper into your bones. Behind the warmth of shared tales, there's a sharp edge. One wrong word, and the same mouth smiling at you now could be chanting your guilt tomorrow. The tavern's warmth is tempting, but curiosity tugs you elsewhere, toward the square, where the empty stocks stand like a warning carved from oak. You've heard enough whispers tonight to know that anyone could end up there, from a thief caught red-handed to a neighbor who simply made the wrong enemy. The stocks are simple, 2 thick planks with semicircular holes cut for head and hands, secured with a heavy iron hinge. They're worn smooth in places, not from craftsmanship, but from the sheer number of bodies held fast here over the years. The wood smells faintly of old sweat, damp hay, and something sourer you'd rather not identify. You imagine being locked there for hours or days, in the wind, the rain, or under the blazing sun. Passers-by wouldn't just ignore you, they'd make a sport of it. Rotten vegetables, dung, insults, all fair game. Historians still argue whether these punishments were more about deterrence or public humiliation, but either way they worked. The fear is palpable. A quirky detail you overheard earlier comes to mind. In one nearby town, they once sentenced a baker to wear his burnt loaves strung around his neck while sitting in the stocks. It sounds almost comedic until you remember how seriously public shame is taken here. Once branded in people's minds as incompetent or dishonest, your life shrinks. Customers vanish, friendships dissolve, and even your children might inherit the stain of your disgrace. It's not just the stocks, of course. The pillory, the whipping post, even the ducking stool for scolds. Each has its own specific choreography of pain and embarrassment. And then there's the justice meted out in less official ways. A mob outside your house at night. A field mysteriously set alight. A sudden accident in the woods. You pass a small group gathered near the well. They're talking about a young man who was fined for poaching deer on the Lord's land. He swears he didn't know it was forbidden, though it's common knowledge that all the game belongs to the Lord. Ignorance, it seems, is no shield here. Law in this world isn't built for fairness as you'd understand it. It's a patchwork of local customs, manorial decrees, and church rules, sometimes conflicting, often enforced by whoever has the loudest voice or the most allies. Witnesses are everything, but so is reputation. A known troublemaker might be punished on suspicion alone, while the well-liked miller's son can wriggle out of almost anything. You skirt past the stocks and follow the road toward the outer edge of the village, where a few dark shapes loom. Gallows, long unused but still standing. The rope hangs limp, swaying slightly in the evening breeze. No one lingers here. The shadow it casts seems to seep into the ground itself. A passing shepherd catches your glance and mutters, "Best keep your head down, stranger." It's less advice and more a survival command. You nod, because here, the line between an ordinary day and the worst day of your life is thin enough to step over without noticing. On your way back toward the lights of the main street, you notice the blacksmith's apprentice standing by the stocks, running his fingers over the locking mechanism as if imagining what it would feel like. His face is unreadable. You hope it's simple curiosity, but you've already learned, in medieval justice, curiosity alone can be dangerous. Leaving the silent threat of the stocks behind, you follow the faint sound of music spilling from the tavern door. It's not elegant, more of a cheerful racket, the kind that suggests half the audience is already deep in their cups. You push inside, greeted by a wave of heat, wood smoke, and the tang of ale-soaked air. The room is a jumble of trestle tables, rough benches, and bodies squeezed close. A bard stands near the hearth, plucking at a battered lute while weaving a tale about a knight who outwitted a demon by offering it a barrel of cider. The crowd roars at every punchline, some clapping, others slapping the table hard enough to make the mugs jump. You edge toward an empty spot on a bench and are immediately handed a wooden cup of ale by a stranger with flushed cheeks and a friendly grin. This is hospitality here, quick, uncomplicated, and often alcoholic. The ale is cloudy and warm, with a bitter tang. You drink anyway. It's safer than the water. Entertainment in this world is rare enough that when it happens, everyone piles in. No one's staring at a parchment notice of upcoming events. You simply hear the lute from the street and know it's tonight or never. Historians still argue whether traveling performers were a cultural lifeline for isolated villages or dangerous outsiders who brought news the Lord would rather keep quiet. A quirky tidbit makes its way to your ears. Apparently, in one neighboring town, a particularly bad singer was once paid not to perform. and he made more money that way than from singing. The man himself is said to have laughed about it for years. The bard shifts into a bawdy but still church-safe song, and the crowd joins in on the refrain. Even the grumpy Cooper in the corner, famous for never smiling, is tapping his foot. Here, music and laughter aren't just distractions. They're a kind of glue that holds fraying spirits together through long winters and hard harvests. Between songs, you notice a dice game in progress at the far end of the table. Wooden cubes clatter over the boards, and coins, a meager pile of copper pennies, change hands. Gambling isn't exactly legal, but it's not uncommon either. The trick is to keep it small enough that no one important notices. Someone nearby tells a story about the last May Day celebration, the dancing around the pole, the garlands of flowers, the feasts that went on until dawn. You realize how much of the year here is measured in festivals and fairs, each one a brief flare of joy before work resumes its endless grind. As the bard wraps up another tale, this one about a talking goose who gives terrible advice, you catch snippets of fresh gossip mixing with the laughter. Even here, where spirits are high, the undercurrent of watchfulness doesn't vanish. A man leans close to his friend, whispering about a merchant whose scales seem suspiciously light. A woman mutters that she's sure the shepherd's wife has been meeting someone in the woods at dusk. It strikes you that in a place with so few distractions, every word, every look is noticed. Entertainment is both a relief and a risk. Too much talk after too much ale, and you might say something you regret by morning. When the bard finally takes his leave, the tavern's noise settles into a quieter hum. A few people doze where they sit. Others nurse the last of their drinks. Outside, you hear the wind picking up, a cold reminder that the walk back to wherever you're sleeping will be a brisk one. You step out into the dark, the warmth of the tavern already fading from your skin, replaced by the sharper bite of night air. Somewhere in the blackness beyond the houses, an owl calls. The village is mostly asleep now, but your day, this endless, strange medieval day, still isn't over. The road away from the tavern feels emptier than before, each shadow stretching a little longer under the moonlight. The only sounds are the crunch of your boots on the frozen dirt and the faint rustle of wind through thatch and bare branches. You pass the church again, its door closed, the single candle in the priest's quarters flickering faintly. Beyond it lies the burial ground, a small uneven plot marked by crude wooden crosses and the occasional weather-worn stone. You hesitate, but curiosity pulls you closer. Here, death isn't tucked away behind hospital walls or handled by professionals. It's part of daily life, as familiar as the turning of the seasons. People die in their homes, and the entire village sees them buried. You've heard that plague years leave whole rows of graves unmarked, dug hastily before the disease can spread further. Historians still argue whether medieval folk feared death more than we do, or simply accepted it as unavoidable. Looking at the ground here, lumpy with countless layers of the departed, you suspect it's a bit of both. A quirky tidbit slips into your mind. In some places, it was believed that burying a corpse face down could keep it from rising again to trouble the living. You glance at the mounded earth and wonder how many of these graves might be hiding someone turned the wrong way. The smell is faint, but unmistakable. Damp earth, rotting leaves, and that underlying tang of decay that no one here bothers to disguise. The graves aren't arranged in perfect lines. Instead, they're wedged where there's room, the older ones sinking or tilting over time. You notice offerings left at a few of the sites: a sprig of holly, a child's wooden toy, a crude loaf of bread. These gestures aren't for show. People here believe the dead still notice such things, and that neglecting them could bring ill luck. As you turn to go, A thin mist begins to coil low over the ground. The moonlight catches it, making it look almost solid in places. You walk faster, not because you believe the stories about wandering spirits. At least that's what you tell yourself. But because the air feels suddenly heavier, as though the night is leaning in to listen. By the time you reach the edge of the burial ground, you can see the faint glow of a fire ahead. It's coming from a small hut on the outskirts, where the village's healer lives. You've heard her name whispered with both gratitude and suspicion. She knows herbs that can draw out fever, but also ones that can make a man sleep forever. You pause outside, peering in through the tiny window. Inside, bundles of dried plants hang from the rafters, and a black pot bubbles gently over the fire. The healer herself moves with slow precision, measuring powders and muttering under her breath. Whether it's prayer or spell, you can't tell. In this world, medicine and magic often share the same space. A poultice of crushed garlic might be prescribed alongside a charm made of knotted red thread. And if it works, no one argues which part did the healing. A dog barks in the distance, startling you from your thoughts. The hut door creaks, and the healer steps out, glancing toward you. Her eyes linger for a moment, assessing, weighing, before she simply nods and turns back inside. You take the hint and keep moving, the firelight fading behind you. The road ahead leads toward the dark line of the forest, and you can't help but wonder what waits there. The path into the forest feels like crossing an invisible border. One step you're in the open fields with the faint glow of the village behind you. The next you're under a tangle of branches that blot out most of the moonlight. The air changes too, cooler and damp, carrying the scent of moss and leaf mold. Every twig snap sounds louder here. You move carefully, boots sinking into the soft mulch of the forest floor. This is where villagers rarely wander after dark unless they have to. Not because of bandits, though that's always possible, but because the forest is considered its own realm, with rules humans don't fully control. You recall hearing a farmer say, "Best to treat the woods like an old lord. Keep your head down and speak politely." Historians still argue whether these forest superstitions began as genuine fear of the unknown or as subtle warnings to keep people from over-harvesting resources the Lord wanted for himself. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Some communities believed whistling in the woods after sunset would summon spirits who'd lead you astray until dawn. You keep your lips firmly pressed together. The canopy shifts above you, letting through a sliver of moonlight that catches on something pale ahead. A stone marker, half buried under ivy. You brush it clean and see faint carvings, worn by time. It could be a boundary marker, or perhaps something older, from before the village even existed. The deeper you go, the more the forest seems to close in. Roots twist across the path and low branches snag at your clothes. Somewhere off to your left, you hear the rush of water. You follow the sound until you find a narrow stream, moonlight dancing on its surface. The water looks clear, but you remember the advice from earlier in the day. Never drink from a stream unless you know exactly what's upstream. You crouch, listening. The forest is never truly silent. It's alive with the rustle of small creatures, the creak of branches, and the occasional sharp cry of a night bird. But there's also a strange rhythm beneath it all, a pulse you can almost feel through your boots. On the far bank, something catches your eye. A small bundle wrapped in cloth, wedged between two rocks. You wade carefully across and lift it out. Inside is a scattering of coins, a sprig of rosemary, and a carved wooden figure. It's an offering, left where the forest spirit is believed to pass. Whether it's meant to bring luck or ask for forgiveness, you can't tell. You replace it exactly as you found it. In this place, you've learned, disturbing something you don't understand is the quickest way to make enemies, human or otherwise. The path eventually leads you to a clearing. In the center stands a massive oak, older than the village, its trunk wide enough that it would take 5 people to encircle it. The ground beneath is worn bare, as though many feet have gathered here over the years. You sense it's a meeting place, maybe for seasonal rituals, maybe for things not spoken of openly. You stand quietly for a while, feeling the cool night air brush against your skin, the faint movement of leaves overhead. Out here, away from the walls and rules of the village, you can almost imagine surviving longer than a day. Almost. Then a branch snaps somewhere behind you. Close. Too close. You turn, scanning the darkness. Nothing moves, but the feeling of being watched prickles at the back of your neck. Whatever it is, you decide it's time to head back toward the faint, distant light of the village. By the time you break free of the trees, the village feels almost unreal. A scattering of shadowy shapes under the moon, the chimneys long gone cold. Your boots are damp from the stream, your clothes faintly scented with forest moss. The air out here on the open path is sharper, biting into your cheeks and fingertips. You move quietly, as though even the houses might be sleeping. In truth, they are, each timber-framed shell holding the curled-up forms of families huddled together for warmth. Somewhere a dog barks once, then settles again. A cart creaks in the wind. You pass the smithy, its tools locked away for the night, and the small bakery where the faintest smell of flour still hangs in the air. Beyond that lies your temporary shelter, a loft above the stable. You push open the door, greeted by the warm animal scent of hay and the soft shuffling of horses. Climbing the ladder into the loft, you stretch out on a bed of straw, pulling your cloak over you. The wood creaks softly beneath you, and the muffled breathing of the horses below forms a kind of steady rhythm. Outside, the wind picks up again, rattling the shutters. Historians still argue whether nights like this, in cold but quiet, routine but tinged with the uncertainty of survival, made life feel secure or fragile. Perhaps it was both at once. You think of the day you've had, the freezing well water, the wary market eyes, the threat of the stocks, the welcome of the tavern, the silent wait of the graveyard, the strange offerings in the forest. Each moment carried its own set of rules, its own dangers, and its own kind of beauty. A quirky tidbit floats into your mind. In some places, people believed that placing a piece of iron under your bed would keep away evil spirits. You glance at the blacksmith's tools hanging on the wall below, and almost consider borrowing one. Almost. Instead, you close your eyes and let the stable's warmth seep in. Survival here isn't about grand acts of heroism. It's about making it through the night so you can face whatever tomorrow decides to throw at you. And tomorrow, you suspect, will be just as strange, just as exhausting, and just as unforgettable. The sounds of the stable fade into a low, steady hush. The faint rustle of straw beneath you softens, blending with the rhythmic breath of the horses. In the stillness, each creak of timber feels slower, stretched thin like the shadows drifting across the walls. Outside, the wind's edge dulls to a gentle sigh, brushing past the shutters in long, unbroken waves. Moonlight pools faintly in the gaps between boards, a pale reminder that the world beyond is still there, waiting, but not pressing. Not tonight. Your breathing matches the quiet pulse of the place, slow and unhurried. The day's jagged edges, the cold water, the wary glances, the unsettling mist, all smooth themselves into the distance. The hay beneath you shifts slightly, cradling your weight, and the warmth in the air holds steady, unchanging. Somewhere far away, a lone nightbird calls once, then is silent. The stillness that follows is heavy, but not in a way that demands anything from you. It's the weight of safety, the kind you only notice when the day's noise finally fades. The horses shift below, their hooves a soft shuffle against the packed earth. A tail swishes lazily. You can almost imagine that the entire building is breathing with you. Slow, patient, untroubled. The scent of hay, faint wood smoke, and the warmth of living creatures is grounding. The night feels endless here, not in a restless way, but in a way that invites you to simply stay where you are, unmoving. The last thing you notice before your thoughts dissolve into the comfortable dark is the steady, reassuring heartbeat of the world. The quiet promise that for now, for tonight, you've made it. And that's enough. End of script. Sweet dreams.